Hello and welcome to AAC Access All Areas. My name is Ali Battye.
I'm Ruth Jones. Today's episode question is, how do I set up AAC tools for my Gestalt language processor? And I think, Ali, it makes sense to head to you for a really good definition of it.
Yeah, so what is Gestalt language processing? It's a very long term. It basically means Gestalt means whole, like the whole experience. And we often see a tendency in autistic children to really like that whole experience early on in their development, especially. So they might like to collect the whole alphabet, or they like to recite a story in its entirety. If something has unfolded in a particular way the first time they did it, they kind of expect or like it to unfold in exactly that way the second time. So an example that I often give is, say you've taken your child to see the doctor, and the time that they remember going, they had like a crackly chest or something, and the doctor had to listen to their chest with a stethoscope. But then when you go again, say 6 months or a year later, it's actually they've got an ear infection this time, but they would still lift up their top for the doctor to listen to their chest. Because often we see that these children have absolutely brilliant episodic memories, and you might notice that in your everyday life. Like, I've had parents say, yeah, my child remembered like which hotel we stayed in 5 years ago, and they were only like 18 months old at the time, or the lay-by where we broke down on the motorway. And so yeah, this brilliant memory seems to work for listening to language as well. So in Gestalt language processing, children who have this tendency might pick up like chunks of language more easily than single words. So Ruth and I were both trained, as pretty much every speech and language therapist is trained, that the way into language, the first step is that children will learn single words first. Then they'll, about a year later, they'll start to combine those single words into little phrases. So, they might have the word biscuit and sock, and then they'll start combining that with like more biscuit, or biscuit gone, or get sock. But in Gestalt language processing, it doesn't really happen like that. So children will pick up like whole chunks of language. It may not be clear. So we might hear something like, and then it gets more clear, but we might also realise that that actually is a line from, say, Peppa Pig or Hey Dougie, or something that we said last week. It's just very unclear because a child's speech is unclear at that stage. And probably for the listeners, you're thinking, well, what if my child is a non-speaker, or if they're minimally speaking? How would I know if they're a Gestalt language processor? And one of the key things, there's a few key things, but one of the key things is they might really like, when they're watching YouTube Kids, to rewind and replay the same little clip over and over and again. Or you might notice those like the tune of language. So they might not have very clear speech sounds, but you might hear that they're saying something in exactly the same tone each time, like "Ah," and it's always like that. "Ah," and it might be something like where's my drink gone, or something, but it's just really unclear at this time. And another thing just to sort of look out for would be that like really engaging with songs and music, because I think it tends to go with a real appreciation for music and musical language.
Mm.
So yeah, sorry, that was you can tell it's one of my favourite subjects, can't you?
Well, one thing I'm also thinking about is that what we notice is that for a lot of our children, like I quite like the concept of this being a language continuum, and there's kind of that
Mm.
really analytical language, that single
Yeah.
words, two words together, three words together at one end, and our gestalts at the other. And some children will kind of move
Yes.
along that continuum in different places. Some sit really heavily at one end, some might be at the
Mm.
other, some might sit sort of a bit of a crossover. But I think what I notice a lot with our Gestalt language processes at that end of the continuum is that sort of musicality and that intonation. Um, but I think also when I sing, they tell me to stop, and it's because I'm not
Mm.
very good at singing. And so you might find if you've got a child who seems to like music but doesn't like you singing, if you are
Yeah.
not pitch perfect, you could be a
Yes.
that could also be an indicator that actually really music needs singing.
Bit confusing, isn't it? So the analogy I like to give is think about your absolute favourite song, recorded song. Do you ever like anybody to do a cover version of it, or would you like
Yeah.
to hear someone murder it on karaoke? and, and you probably wouldn't, because the original is just so perfect and
Hmm.
expresses that emotion that we're really wanting to tune into.
Yeah.
And somebody else doing it in a different voice or different instrumentation or just something else that feels a bit off. It's too slow, it's too fast, it's too high pitched or low pitch, wrong kind of vocal timbre, the sound of the voice. It's just not the same. So particularly like for children's favourite gestalts, their favourite songs or phrases, the most meaningful ones, they probably don't appreciate a change to that. It's just too
No.
perfect already.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing I'm also thinking about is kind of those indicators, is when we think about children with spoken language, we might think about them being quite stuck in like a particular phrase, and a particular script that they use, or it might be they have some single words that kind of they seem to be using in context, but they never really grow that. So it doesn't that kind of process where they've got a single word, but they're not really attaching anything else to it. And I think we can see the same if you have a child who's already got an AAC device
Mhm.
where they kind of get a bit stuck
No.
in the same sorts of I want this or
Mm.
just single words. Um, and so if you've been doing lots of modeling and you're kind of not necessarily seeing that growth in their language with single words sort of teaching method with AAC systems, I think sometimes that might just be a moment where you could then sort of reflect and think, oh, I wonder, so some of the
Yes.
things that you've talked about there, Ali, as people are listening and kind of thinking, oh, well, actually, my child does like to watch that same sequence out of Peppa Pig, or they do
Mm.
listen to that same bit of a song or that chunk of a movie, and you're thinking, how much progress are they making with their AAC? It could be worth listening on to the rest of this episode as we go into
Mm.
what things might you be thinking about as you're setting up an AAC system for a
Yes.
GLPer.
Yes, yes. And it's worth saying at the outset that we're not going to take anything away from one of those standard AAC app vocabularies. So
No.
all of the ones that we talk about probably in every episode. So, Grid for iPad, TD Snap, Proloquo to Go. They already have the vocabulary, like a really full, rich vocabulary for future language growth. So we don't want to remove that at this stage. This child is going to need that, but we might consider adding some more Gestalt-like language to offer alongside it. And if you've got a minimally speaking child or a child who has unreliable speech, which means sometimes they have access to speech, but sometimes when they're dysregulated, they may not, or very tired or coming down with illness, they may not have such good access to their speech. So they may already have some spoken gestalts. So you might consider programming those spoken gestalts onto their AAC as well.
Mhm.
What I haven't said, which is useful to just note, is echolalia is what we're talking about here. So we were
Mhm.
trained to use the term echolalia with autistic children. So immediate echolalia is where children copy back language straight away or part of what we've said straight away. And then delayed echolalia is when they use that language chunk elsewhere. And it's often used really cleverly because there's something about the current situation which is reminding them of that previous time they've heard it. So
Mm.
it's almost like referencing, like we do with movies or a song line or something. If we're in a situation, a song line might come to us, or I'm just going to give an example here. Me and my daughter were grooming our dogs, like clippering. We've invested in a clipper and a grooming table because our dog groomer has got pregnant and we can't find another one. So we're having lots of fun with our dogs, pretending to be dog groomers. And we both thought of a line from Charlie and Lola that we used to watch. My daughter's like 19 now, but one of our favourite episodes is when Sizzles, the sausage dog, is being petted by Lola and Lotta, and Lola and Lotta are saying, "Dogs just love to feel pretty." And they clearly don't love to feel pretty. They're having bows put in and they're hating every moment. So, if there's a situation like that and a line comes to you, a line from a song, a line from a movie, a line from Friends, that is essentially what a Gestalt language processor tends to do. They pull language from
Yeah.
previous experience, and it's deeply meaningful.
Yeah, and I think what is also quite we often hear lots of examples, don't we, from that kind of media, those sorts of things, and it just takes me to the fact that actually it's often grounded in that meaningful experience. And I
Mm.
used to work with a child, and the bit I'm taken back to, this was years ago, but we used to record bits of sessions for assessments and things. And one of my OT colleagues had recorded their assessment, and this child's trying to put little pegs, some sort of assessment they do, fine motor, into a thing. And you can hear the child saying, "Nearly all done, just one more, nearly all done." And the tone and the pitch is exactly mum trying to get that child at some point in their history clearly through something that they didn't want to do. Just one more, nearly all done. And this kind of scripting that was coming out. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be from media. We
Mm.
do know that that carries a lot of meaning for our Gestalt language processes, but it can be things like that they've heard in a
Mm.
particularly heightened moment when something was very meaningful, very emotional, and they kind of hang their hat on the language that's used in the moment. I've
Mm.
also worked with children who, when they become quite distressed and dysregulated, will then kind of use that echolalia, that Gestalt like chunk of language. Um, so you might hear them saying things like, "It's time to be calm, it's time to be
Yes.
calm," or like, "I'm
Yes.
calm," or "Quiet hands." And they'll be saying
Mm.
it because actually when they've been distressed, that's the language they've been given for that
Yes.
experience that they're having. And so I think we can see it both from the media scripts, can't we? And things that
Mm.
might be, but also then at times maybe with that anxiety, with that distress, that dysregulation, that might be adult language models because they've often been very emotional times for
Mm.
children, and they
Yes.
then hang on to the language that they're hearing. So I think we get lots of ideas, don't we, about what chunks of language children are hanging on to and making meaningful. And then the next
Mhm.
step is thinking about how do we get that AAC system
Yeah.
ready for them if we know that that single word of core vocab and that fringe vocab that we've talked about isn't necessarily going to meet their language learning
Mm.
profile at this point in time.
Yes, yes. So there are several ways to think about the development in Gestalt language processing. But the most commonly used sort of framework is Marge Blanc's natural language acquisition. And it was first, I think the first four stages were first coined by Barry Prezant, who is the absolutely brilliant researcher and academic and writer and advocate for autistic children, who wrote Uniquely Human and also has a brilliant podcast called Uniquely Human. So Barry Croissant came up with 4 stages of potential Gestalt language processing, where children would move through from stage 1, where they're picking up language wholes, language gestalts. So these would be produced in exactly the same way, so the same intonation, or nothing changes about that language chunk. So you get used to hearing it, and okay, that is one of their gestalts. And then if we're supporting them well, if we are responding to their gestalts, maybe offering some new pieces of language that reflect their potential thoughts and feelings in the moment, so they're getting richness of language, we can help them to move into stage 2, which is where they start breaking those chunks down. So they're able to trim down a longer chunk, and then perhaps recombine it with a new piece of language. And it all then gets a bit more meaningful. And more obvious to other people what they're meaning. So, for example, if they have an original chunk which is "we need to get our shoes on," or something like that, stage 2 might be that they analyse that enough to start mixing and matching with other language chunks. "We need to get our socks on. We need to get in the car. We need to eat dinner." So they're sort of like recognising the patterns in language and then able to play with that a little bit. So that's stage 2, where the original gestalt has been changed, sometimes called mitigation. It's been mitigated or changed in some way. Stage 3 is where they truly understand that a word carries a very particular meaning. So car means the thing that we get in and drive, or as distinct from bike, or sock is different from shoe. So they've had enough experience using stage 1, stage 2 language to start to realise, oh, that's what that word is referring to. And that's what we as speech and language therapists call referential language. A word refers to a thing, or a symbol refers to a thing in the real world. And so that's a really momentous stage. That's where, if you're not a Gestalt language processor, most children start at those single words and knowing the meaning of the single word. And then stage 4 is they can then start creating those word plus word, or word plus word plus word plus word combinations from there, and grammar starts to develop. So in AAC is already perfectly set up for stage 3 and 4, because it's got lots of single words, and it's got, nouns, verbs, adjectives, locations, pronouns, conjunctions, all those different types of words already in a good core and fringe vocabulary package. So that's why I say we'll need that later. When they get to stage 3 and 4, they'll need that language. But the ways that we can support stages 1 and 2 are, we can offer more sort of whole phrases, chunks of language. So we might have sort of like some dedicated pages for particular communication intentions. So when we think about why do we communicate for lots of different reasons, and they might include expressing joy and connection, protesting when something goes wrong. So to say something like, "I don't like it," or "that's not fair." To describe something like, "Oh, that's hot," or "I got wet." Another reason that we might communicate could be to express our regulation needs, like need to move, or need a squeeze, or self-advocacy, like "give me space," or "I can do it." So lots and lots of different reasons why children communicate, and we want to model those different communication intentions. So one way of doing it is having a page for each different communication intention. We might create a page for sharing joy, a page for sharing ideas, a page for protesting, etc., and put a few phrases on there. Or if we have go into like a topic folder, say we're in the animals folder, we might add some phrases that we might need when we're around, say, farm animals. Let's stroke it, or give it some food, or look at that one, so that we've got like some whole phrases alongside the single words. And that is setting us up really nicely for stage 2 because we can start mix and matching those phrases with the single words and show how we can swap a word in and out of that sort of language frame. So sometimes stage 2 is referred to frame and slot. We've got a language frame. So for example, let's stroke that's the frame, and we can slot in goat or rabbit or snake into that, and really make that language structure explicit for a child. They can
Mhm.
really see how language works in that way. I've done it
Yeah.
again. You've gone on and on and on. It's your turn to speak now, Ruth. Sorry.
Oh, not at all. I'm sitting laughing it up like, wow, this is like one-to-one supervision or like a training session. This is fabulous. But I think, yeah, I think you're right. There are different ways of doing it. And sometimes what I recommend to families, particularly of non-speaking children, where they might have some of those indicators that they could potentially be more towards the Gestalt language processing end of the continuum, but we're maybe not so confident in a real
Mm,
out and out way, is that you can set up a bit of both. So
yeah.
I quite like on Supercore, on the homepage, there's a button called Messages. And if you open
Mm,
that up, it has folders by a broad range of different functions. And so what we sometimes might look at is what's in there, what
mm,
kind of chunks are children using and what are they trying to communicate with those chunks, and then kind of programming some vocab around the language that they use. So if, for
mm,
example, we take that earlier child I was talking about and said, nearly all done, nearly all done. That
mm,
was them basically saying like, can we hurry up? Or I don't want to do
yeah.
this, or I don't
Yeah.
like this, or this is tricky. What you might do is then go into that folder and say, actually, that's the something's wrong, or that's the help folder. And you might say nearly all done, and then have another one like, it's tricky. So you've kind of got
Mm,
their chunk of language, which is related to them, but you've also got that frame and slot model that
yes.
you were talking about. So I quite like programming some of those chunks that they're already using
Mm,
into the same page alongside the frame and slot. I don't know what you normally do with their phrases, but I think that can be quite a helpful way.
oh, absolutely. And you know, their media preferences. So if they are rewinding and rewatching certain clips on Bluey or Hey Dougie or whatever, those are good to program in as well, because we know that that is the language that they're already finding delightful and meaningful
Mhm.
in some way. So if I give you an example, actually, which was going to be my glimmer, but I'll use it now. So I was with a child yesterday, and we started off. I think I've got like a Fisher Price record player, which is the best toy ever. It's like a retro one. It's been reissued. I had it when I was a child in the late 70s, and they've reissued an
Mm.
updated version of it, but it's just as robust as it was in the 70s. So you can play records. So I was with a child, and so I went into the music page on their AAC, and they started really engaging with the favourite songs that they'd got on there. So they'd got things like Hakuna Matata, and one of the songs that they were pressing the button for, it was Trust in Me.
Mhm.
They did lots of songs, but then they were really focusing in on Trust in Me, and that became really meaningful throughout our whole session yesterday, actually. So then we moved on to the child was playing with a spinner, and it was quite a complicated spinner with two parts where they'd got to put the handle into the base, turn the handle, and keep it all together, and then press the button, and then it would spin. And this is a child who really values their independence. They don't like an adult interfering, or, you know, they have to be really desperate to ask for help because they just like to feel competent in the world. Um, and I noticed that he was saying trust in me again when he was doing that. And so that became like a real repeated refrain throughout the session. So I was repeating that back, trust in me, and also offering, I've got this. I can do it. So we'd got those two phrases already on the AAC. I can do it. So I was modelling that, but I was also modelling trust in me because that was his chosen chunk of language for
Mhm.
that moment. Um, so I guess we're offering richness, like variety in the AAC. Like we are offering what they've already got language wise, whether it's what they're showing us that they've got from YouTube, or that they are sometimes able to access through speech. But we're also offering somewhere new to go. So some new
Mm.
phrases or some new frame and slot language as well. And once they've got that variety, that will help them move into stage 3 where they really truly have that referential language.
Yeah, I think that's the piece, isn't it? When we're thinking about our children who are more at that GLP end of the continuum, that AAC has to be meaningful, which is what we say with
Mm,
all AAC users.
mm,
But what looks like meaningful interaction and language to a GLPer might look very different to an
mm,
analytical language processor. So it's that piece about, like we have to do that detective work over what are their chunks of language telling us, like that trust in me.
mm.
You do the detective work, you work out what they're almost saying is like, I can do this, like I
Yeah.
can do this for myself. So then you want to model that language. And that's where I think the power of AAC for Gestalt language processors can be really exciting, because you can create those language models that are meaningful to them while still offering a language model that offers some development into referential and more contextual language
Yeah.
that they will get to.
Yes.
But what we do know is that kind of sticking with that analytical language often will maybe see not much progress, or you kind of get that very stuck in one function of communication. Um, and that sort of stuckness in, and it's often requesting, let's face it, because
Mm,
people go to, well, they're not really getting the language models, so we'll do something really motivating, which is they've got to ask for something to get something, and it becomes a behavior reward
mhm,
sort of thing, which is probably a conversation for another day, because I could go on all day about that.
mhm,
Don't do it. And so I think there is that piece, isn't there, that if you get the programming right with AAC, and actually just thinking about our paper-based users, you can still
mm,
create a very similar thing where you can have that different functions on a page for a communication board, or on several pages for a communication book, where you're thinking about all the functions you talked about, and maybe
mm,
like typing out and having pictures for a couple of their different phrases they're already using, and then still that
mm.
frame and slot model on the
Yes.
rest of the page. And I guess one thing just to think about is, when you're thinking about that frame and slot model, is doing a bit of research and really considering what frames you're offering, because some
Mm,
frames are actually not very flexible. So you've
mm,
given us a few lovely examples, haven't you, like that it's and I'm and let's, because then
mm,
you can slot in lots of different things
mm,
to that frame.
mm.
Um, Whereas there are other frames that actually, if you think about them, there's not much slots in, so they're a bit
Yes.
limiting. I
Yes.
think
Yes.
just another sort of note for people, if you're thinking about programming, is think about what frames you're going to offer, and make sure that
Mhm.
have a little play about with it when you're programming, like say it out loud. What other
Yeah.
things could you slot into that frame? And there's lots
Yes.
of, literature out there, isn't there, about choosing those frames, and also thinking about them being meaningful for the child's
Mm,
experiences, because
yeah.
actually, all children learn language through meaning and experience and emotion and fun and joy and anger and all those kind of things. But it's
Mm.
kind of even more impactful and even more important, I think, when we look at our Gestalt processors.
Yes, yes. And one thing that I find useful is just to watch a child and see what they're doing when they're really engaged in an activity of their own choosing. What are they doing with that thing? So, for example, I made a page for a child who really, really loves glitter, but my starting point was watching what do they really like to do with that glitter, and then that gave me the language ideas. So it was like gather it up, sprinkle it, look at the colours, look at the sparkles. So that, yeah, I would say start with observing what a child is already doing, because that's your starting point, and then think what language might they find interesting and appealing, because
Mm.
that's where we're trying to go from. what are they going to find sort of intrinsically interesting and motivating? We're not trying to shape them and sort of like make them say anything. We're looking at, well, what language would be useful to them? What language do they need?
Hmm.
And it might also be in moments when they're struggling. So what language do they need to manage transitions? Like it's nearly time to go is a useful phrase to model, or I'm not done yet, I need more time, or what's next. So yeah, think about what language your child doesn't have, but that would be useful to them.
Mm. And I was just glancing across at our questions for the future. I think the next episode
Mm.
we record is actually going to be what are those different reasons somebody might communicate for. So
Mm.
we're like, this is a little glimmer into the future for everyone. That the next episode we are going to think a little bit about what are those different functions for communication, because we can program those for our GLPs, but also thinking about
Mm.
our analytical language processing end of the
Mm.
continuum as well. So we've done a little bit of a whistle stop there, I think,
Mm.
on Gestalt language processes, but hopefully people are going away with a few things to think about noticing. What can a child who's processing language more at that Gestalt end of the continuum look like and sound like?
Mm.
But also thinking about then what might you be putting into a child's AAC system. And I'm thinking about my glimmer this week as a
Mm.
young person that I've just sort of been started working with probably over the last 4 or 5 weeks. So still really getting to know them. Um, but I was in the classroom with them yesterday and they were playing with the little like number link cubes that have got sort of like little bits like dots and you can clip them all together. And they were playing with those and there was a peer came and joined. And I think it's fair to say that they're both working on taking turns and kind of sharing equipment together. But what was really, it kind of made me giggle, but they were then started taking each other's from each sort of little pile. And the child that I was working with was laughing. So I kind of went to their page, they're a Proloquo to go user. So I went, chat, positive, it's funny. And they looked at me and then looked down and pressed, I'm joking. Like it's like a
Oh.
single, but I just thought this is so incredible
Mm.
to see that level of language,
Understanding as well.
and
Yeah, it's
that
amazing.
humor being a way
Yeah.
in. And so it's kind of given me some information thinking about how do we enhance humor within the
Yes.
AOC
Yeah.
experience that they're
Yeah.
having while they're kind of starting out on their journey, and we're looking at
Mm.
upskilling the communication partners. I think it's going to be really leaning into humor.
Yeah, brilliant. Because children love being cheeky, don't they? Like, that often has been a real win, to add to AAC. Like, some little cheeky phrases can be
Yeah.
really, really powerful. Um, so mine is I did a school visit this morning, and the class teacher on our walk up to the classroom said, "Oh, we've been having a bit of hitting this week, and I haven't seen that before." So I sort of did a bit of, "Oh, when's that happening?" Um, so I was starting to think, well, there'll be a good reason behind this, so when we were in the classroom, um, this child, it was getting towards outdoor playtime, and I think that this child can read the clock. So I think that they are anticipating and know when it's time. It's my outdoor time, and no one seems to be noticing. And sure enough, this child sort of like went over to the door and started getting cross, um, and there was a little bit of hitting, like nothing bad, just like a really annoyed slap, like, we would do if we didn't have language accessible to us in that moment. So I had brought in a communication book which was designed for a GLP and organized into communication intentions. So use the protesting page to say something's wrong, and just instantly got that lovely sort of child stopping, looking, yeah, something is wrong, Ali. Um, and we had a couple more like cycles of this, like the child was like okay, but then went to the door again, and so I was also modelling. I don't like it, and I'm upset. And every time I modelled one of these phrases, this child just like it was like a regulation thing, like oh good, someone gets this. So
Mm,
I'm not needing to resort to like that physical frustration because someone already gets it. So that was just it was a night. The reason it's a glimmer is that this child hasn't particularly appreciated AAC up until now. So like they've pushed it away and found it actually quite annoying to get in the way of
mhm.
things. So that was really nice to see this child really looking and examining this communication book and clearly finding it useful as well.
Yeah, it's lovely, isn't it? That power of validation. I think all of us as adults could be listening to this and thinking about a time where we tried to share how we felt and somebody minimized that, oh, don't be
Mm.
silly. Oh, it's no big deal. And how difficult that can then be to process it. So I think there is
Mm.
so much power for children, and particularly in those early AAC modeling, but even actually if you're just modeling spoken language.
Mm.
I was with a child just yesterday who really wanted to get involved in my speech session. I wasn't there for them, and I just said, "It is so hard. These games look
Mm.
so fun. I want a turn." And they just paused and just looked and
Mhm.
connected. And so I think,
Mhm.
there is so much, isn't there, in that kind of noticing and validating
Yes,
when we're
yes,
doing that early AAC work. It's
yeah.
yeah, it's really
Whenever
incredible.
you hear the word behaviour, like we're seeing some behaviours, always think, right, what's going on for this child and meet that with empathy, because there is a
Yeah.
very good reason why that child is feeling so dysregulated in that
Yeah.
moment.
And sometimes you might not know the answer, but just that moment of validation can be really
Mm,
regulating,
mm,
and that moment to connect and pause and then put in the
mm,
regulating strategies if we can't get to the bottom of what's underneath
mm,
at
mm.
the bottom of the iceberg. But
Yeah, just
yeah,
showing that we're
conversation
trying
for
is helpful, isn't it?
yeah, that's it exactly. That moment for connection.
Mm.
It has been lovely as always, Ali. Thank you so much for this chat
Thank
today.
you, Ruth.
And we'll look forward to seeing everyone for the next episode, thinking about those different language functions.
Excellent. Yes. See you next time.
All right. Bye, everyone.